The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window of what I thought was still my grandmother's cottage, casting golden shadows across the worn wooden table where I'd eaten countless breakfasts as a child. I was stirring my coffee when Dad walked in, his face bearing an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of guilt and defiance that made my stomach clench with sudden dread. "Maya, we need to talk," he said, settling heavily into the chair across from me. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. The cottage creaked around us, as if sensing the gravity of whatever was coming. "What's wrong?" I asked, though part of me already knew. The calls from strangers asking about property lines, the real estate agent's car I'd spotted in the driveway last week when I wasn't supposed to be here, Dad's evasive answers when I'd asked about it. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded check, placing it on the table between us like an offering to some vengeful god. The paper seemed to glow white against the dark wood, and I could see my name written in his careful script. "The cottage sold yesterday," he said quietly. "I've put $15,000 aside for you. It should help you get back on your feet after the divorce." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at the check, my vision blurring as the numbers came into focus. $15,000 for my grandmother's $1 million cottage. The cottage that was supposed to be mine. "You sold it?" My voice came out as a whisper, barely audible above the sudden roaring in my ears. "Dad, Grandma May left this place to me. She left it to me in her will." He had the decency to look ashamed, but his jaw remained set in that stubborn line I knew so well. The will was complicated, Maya. There were debts, medical bills from her final months that ate up most of her savings. I had to make the practical choice. Practical choice? I stood so abruptly that my coffee cup rattled against its saucer. "This cottage has been in our family for 3 generations. Grandma May restored every inch of it herself. She taught me how to sand these floors, how to tend her garden, how to fix the porch swing when it squeaked. She told me stories about great-grandmother Rose planting that oak tree out front. This isn't just property, Dad. This is our history." "History doesn't pay bills," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maya, you're 32 years old, divorced, unemployed, and you've been living here rent-free for 8 months. At some point, you need to face reality." The cruelty of it took my breath away. Yes, I'd moved back to the cottage after Tom and I split up. Yes, I'd been struggling to find work in my field. Graphic design wasn't exactly booming in our small lakeside town, but this place had been my sanctuary, my connection to the strong women who came before me, my promise of stability in a world that had turned upside down. "How much did you sell it for?" I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. Dad's silence stretched between us like a chasm. "How much, Dad?" $950,000, he whispered. The air left my lungs in a rush, nearly $1 million, for my inheritance, my birthright. And he was offering me $15,000 like some kind of charitable donation. $950,000, I repeated slowly, tasting each word like poison. "And you think 15,000 makes this right?" "Maya, please understand." "No." I picked up the check and held it at eye level, examining it like evidence at a crime scene. "No, I don't think I understand at all." "Help me understand, Dad. Walk me through your logic here." His face reddened. The cottage needed work. Structural repairs, a new roof, updated electrical. It would have cost you a fortune to maintain. "So you decided for me?" "Without asking, without even telling me you were considering it." I set the check back down carefully, my hands surprisingly steady despite the rage building in my chest. "Tell me something, Dad. Where's the rest of the money?" There were expenses. $935,000 in expenses? I laughed, but it came out sharp and bitter. Come on, Dad. I may be unemployed, but I'm not stupid. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the lake that sparkled beyond the trees. Your stepmother has been wanting to retire. We found a place in Arizona, near her daughter. The climate will be better for my arthritis. There it was. The truth. Finally. Sandra. My father's wife of 5 years. The woman who'd never bothered to hide her resentment of the cottage, of the time Dad spent maintaining it, of the way I'd retreated here after my divorce instead of moving on with my life, as she so frequently suggested. You sold my inheritance to buy your wife a retirement home, I said flatly. Maya, you're being dramatic. Am I? I stood and walked to the mantelpiece, running my fingers over the framed photographs that chronicled 3 generations of women in this house. Grandma May, as a young bride, learning to cook in this very kitchen. My mother at age 5, building sand castles on the beach below. Me at 16, helping Grandma May plant the rose bushes that still bloomed outside the front door. You know what Grandma May told me the last time I saw her? I turned back to face him, my voice dangerously quiet. She said this place would always be mine, no matter what happened. She said the women in our family were strong enough to weather any storm as long as we had this place to anchor us. She made me promise to take care of it, to pass it down to my own daughter someday. Dad's shoulders sagged. Your grandmother was sentimental. My grandmother was right. I picked up the check again, this time folding it carefully and sliding it into my back pocket. But you know what? Thank you, Dad. Thank you for showing me exactly who you really are. Maya, please don't be like this. You're my daughter. I love you. If you loved me, you would have called me before you listed the property. If you loved me, you would have asked if I wanted to find a way to keep it in the family. If you loved me, you wouldn't have reduced my inheritance to beer money. I walked past him toward the stairs, needing to put distance between us before I said something I couldn't take back. But halfway up, I stopped and turned. Who bought it, Dad? What? The cottage. Who bought it? He wouldn't meet my eyes. A developer. They're planning to tear it down. Build something bigger. The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Not only had he sold my birthright, but he'd sold it to someone who would erase every trace of our family's history. The walls that held 4 generations of laughter and tears, the floors that had been walked by my great-grandmother's feet, the garden where my mother had taken her first steps. All of it would be bulldozed to make room for some McMansion. I climbed the rest of the stairs in a daze and locked myself in what had been my childhood bedroom. Through the window, I could see the tire swing Grandpa Joe had hung from the oak tree, still swaying gently in the breeze. By this time next year, it would all be gone. That's when the idea first began to form. I spent the next 3 hours on my laptop, researching property law, inheritance disputes, and real estate contracts. What I found made my blood run cold and my resolve crystallize like steel. Dad might have legal right to sell. Grandma May's will had been ambiguous about the timeline, and as her son and executor of the estate, he'd technically followed the letter of the law. But legal and moral were 2 very different things. By evening, I had a plan. I started with the check. Instead of cashing it, I deposited it into a separate account and began documenting everything. Photos of the cottage from every angle, records of my contributions to its upkeep over the years, copies of emails where Grandma May had discussed her intentions for the property. I created a detailed inventory of everything in the house, furniture that had been in the family for decades, artwork my mother had created, books with inscriptions dating back to the 1940s. Then I called my cousin Jake, Grandma May's other grandchild. He was a lawyer in the city, specializing in estate law. Maya, how are you holding up? Jake, I need your professional opinion on something. I told him everything. The sale, the check, Dad's plans for Arizona. Jake listened without interruption, occasionally making small sounds of disbelief. Jesus, Maya, I'm so sorry. I had no idea Uncle Robert was planning this. Is there anything I can do legally? A long pause. Maybe. The will language about when Maya is ready to assume responsibility is vague enough that a good lawyer might be able to argue your father acted prematurely. But it would be expensive to fight, and the cottage is already sold. What if I could prove Dad misrepresented the property's condition or value? What if there was evidence of some kind of conflict of interest? That would change things significantly. But Maya, these kinds of cases can drag on for years. Are you prepared for that kind of battle? I looked out at the lake, where the setting sun painted the water in shades of gold and red. Jake, they're going to tear it down. What? The buyers. They're developers. They're going to bulldoze everything and build something new. The silence stretched between us until Jake finally spoke, his voice tight with anger. That son of a bitch. So yes, I'm prepared for a battle. But I'm going to need your help. You've got it. Over the next week, Jake and I developed a two-pronged strategy. First, we would file an immediate injunction to halt any demolition plans pending our legal challenge. Second, we would investigate the sale itself, looking for any irregularities that might invalidate the contract. What we found exceeded my wildest hopes. The developer who'd bought the cottage was a company called Sunrise Holdings LLC. On paper, it looked like a standard real estate investment firm. But when Jake dug deeper into the corporate filings, he discovered something interesting. Sandra, my stepmother, was listed as a silent partner. Maya, this is huge, Jake said over the phone, his excitement palpable. If your stepmother had a financial interest in the buyer, and your father didn't disclose that conflict of interest, we might be able to void the entire sale. But that wasn't all. Sandra's involvement meant she'd known about the sale long before I did. In fact, she'd probably helped orchestrate it. While I was grieving my grandmother and trying to rebuild my life, she'd been scheming to steal my inheritance. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd thought possible. Dad's actions had been devastating enough, but to learn that Sandra had manipulated him into it, or worse, that they'd planned it together, filled me with a cold fury I'd never experienced before. I decided it was time for a more direct approach. I waited until Dad was at his weekly poker game, then drove to the house where he and Sandra lived. She answered the door in her yoga clothes, her artificially enhanced smile faltering when she saw my expression. Maya. What a surprise. Robert isn't here. I know. I came to see you. I brushed past her into the living room, noting the expensive new furniture, the professional artwork on the walls, the general air of prosperity that seemed to permeate everything Sandra touched. Sandra, I want you to know I think you're a remarkable woman, I began, settling onto her pristine white sofa without being invited. I mean, to convince my father to sell his mother's cottage, the place where he spent his summers as a child, where he brought my mother as a newlywed, where he taught me to swim. That takes real talent. Her face had gone pale beneath her foundation. Maya, I don't know what you think you know, but I know about Sunrise Holdings. The words hung in the air between us like a loaded gun. Sandra's carefully maintained composure cracked, just slightly, but it was enough. I know you're a partner in the company that bought my cottage, I continued conversationally. I know you've been planning this for months, maybe years. I know you convinced my father that I was some kind of burden who needed to be taught a lesson about responsibility. You don't understand the full situation? Then explain it to me. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Explain to me how a woman who's known me for 5 years, who attended exactly 2 family gatherings, who never once set foot in that cottage, came to have such strong opinions about my inheritance. Sandra's hands were shaking now, her perfectly manicured fingers twisting together in her lap. Your father was worried about you. You'd been living there for months without paying rent, without contributing. Without contributing? I laughed, and the sound was harsh in the pristine room. Sandra, I've spent the last 8 months cataloging every repair that Cottage needs, every improvement that could be made. I've researched grants for historical restoration, looked into tax incentives for maintaining heritage properties. I was preparing a business plan to turn it into a bed and breakfast, to make it self-sustaining while preserving its history. This was true. I'd been working on the plan as a way to prove to Dad that I could be responsible for the property, that I had a vision for its future beyond just living there rent-free. I even found buyers who would have paid fair market value while agreeing to preserve the structure and keep it in the family through a leaseback arrangement. But you never gave me the chance to present any of that, did you? Because this was never about teaching me responsibility. This was about getting me out of the way so you could cash in. Sandra stood abruptly, pacing to the window. You don't know what it's like, Maya. Your father talks about that place constantly. Every weekend he's over there fixing something, maintaining something, worrying about something. He's 68 years old. He should be enjoying his retirement, not playing caretaker to a house that holds him hostage to the past. So you decided to free him from that burden by stealing from his daughter. It's not stealing. The words exploded out of her, years of resentment finally finding voice. You're 32 years old, Maya. You're divorced, unemployed, and you've been mooching off your family for almost a year. When exactly were you planning to contribute to society? When were you going to stop hiding in that cottage and build a real life? The cruelty of her words was breathtaking, but they also revealed something important. Sandra genuinely believed she was in the right. In her mind, I was the problem, the obstacle to her and Dad's happiness. She'd convinced herself that destroying my inheritance was actually helping me. You want to know when I was going to stop hiding? I stood and walked toward her, my voice deadly calm. I stopped hiding the moment I walked into that cottage last week and found out what you'd done. I stopped hiding when I decided to fight back. Fight back? Maya, the sale is final. There's nothing you can do. We'll see about that. I left her standing in her perfect living room, surrounded by the luxuries she'd bought with my birthright, and drove home to begin phase 2 of my plan. If Sandra and Dad thought I was going to quietly accept their betrayal, they were about to learn just how wrong they could be. The cottage had taught me about resilience, about the strength that comes from deep roots and older wisdom. Now it was time to put those lessons to use. The next morning, I called the local newspaper. Hi, this is Maya Chen. I'd like to speak to someone about a human interest story. A family cottage being torn down by developers, a grandmother's legacy being erased. I think your readers might find it interesting. The reporter who came out to interview me was a young woman named Jessica, who immediately understood the significance of what was happening. She spent 2 hours touring the cottage with me, photographing the handwritten recipes still tucked into my grandmother's cookbook, the growth chart on the kitchen doorframe marking 3 generations of children, the love letters my grandfather had written to my grandmother during World War II, still preserved in a cedar box in the bedroom. This is incredible, Jessica said, carefully handling a photograph of my great-grandmother standing in front of the cottage in 1952. How could anyone want to tear this down? Ask my father, I replied. Better yet, ask his wife. The article ran 3 days later, complete with a full-color spread of photos showcasing the cottage's history. The headline read, "Century-old family cottage sold to developers. It's like losing our hearts," says granddaughter. Jessica had done her homework. The piece included quotes from local historians about the cottage's significance as one of the original summer homes built around the lake in the 1920s. She'd found county records showing how my great-grandmother had been one of the first women to own property in the area, buying the cottage in her own name after her husband's death in the war. She'd even tracked down elderly neighbors who remembered my grandmother restoring the place in the 1970s, working with her own hands to preserve the original craftsmanship. Most importantly, the article mentioned Sunrise Holdings by name and included a quote from their representative saying they plan to modernize the property to meet current market demands. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone started ringing before the newspaper had even hit doorsteps. Friends I hadn't heard from in years, calling to offer support. Neighbors expressing outrage that such a historic property was being destroyed. A local preservation society asking if they could help fight the demolition. But the most important call came from an unexpected source, the County Planning Commission. Miss Chen? This is David Rodriguez from the Planning Office. I saw the article about your grandmother's cottage, and I wanted to let you know about something that might interest you. The property was recently designated as a potential historical landmark, but the paperwork got held up in bureaucratic red tape. If you're interested in pursuing landmark status, it would automatically halt any demolition plans pending review. How long would that take? 6 months minimum, possibly longer. And if the cottage is granted landmark status, any future development would have to preserve the original structure. What do I need to do? Come in tomorrow morning. Bring any documentation you have about the property's history. Given the public interest this article has generated, I think we can fast-track the initial application. I hung up the phone feeling something I hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. But my celebration was short-lived. An hour later, Dad showed up at the cottage, his face thunderous with rage. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Maya?" "I'm fighting for what's mine." "You're embarrassing the family. That newspaper article makes me sound like a villain." "If the shoe fits." He slammed his hand on the kitchen table, making the salt and pepper shakers jump. "I am your father. I raised you, I fed you, I put a roof over your head for 18 years. I think I've earned a little respect." "Respect is earned, Dad, and it can be lost." "Maya, please. This vendetta isn't going to bring your grandmother back. It's not going to change what happened. The cottage is sold. I'm sorry if that hurts you, but it's done." "Is it?" I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "Because I've been learning some interesting things about that sale. Did you know that failing to disclose a conflict of interest in a real estate transaction can void the contract? Did you know that estate executors can be held liable for breach of fiduciary duty?" Dad's face went white. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about Sandra's involvement in Sunrise Holdings. I'm talking about the fact that you sold my inheritance to your wife's business partners without disclosing that relationship to me or to the probate court. That's not... Sandra didn't..." He trailed off, his bluster evaporating as the implications sank in. "Oh, Dad." I felt a stab of something that might have been pity. "She didn't tell you, did she? You actually thought this was all your idea?" The truth was written across his face. Sandra had played him just as thoroughly as she'd played me, only he was still too invested in his marriage to see it. "It doesn't matter," he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. "Legal technicalities won't change anything. You can't afford to fight this in court. For years." "You're right," I agreed. "I can't. But the Historical Preservation Society can, and the County Planning Commission can, and the 3 news stations that called this morning asking for interviews can certainly make things very unpleasant for Sunrise Holdings." Dad stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "When did you become so ruthless?" "I learned from the best." He left without another word, but I could see the doubt creeping in around the edges of his anger. For the first time since this nightmare began, Dad was starting to question whether he'd made the right choice. Over the next 2 weeks, the story took on a life of its own. The Historical Preservation Society filed their own injunction to prevent demolition. The county fast-tracked the landmark application. A local TV station did a feature about the cottage that went viral on social media, generating thousands of comments from people sharing their own stories of family properties lost to development. Most importantly, Jake's investigation into the sale uncovered more irregularities. Sandra hadn't just failed to disclose her interest in Sunrise Holdings, she'd actively concealed it by using a shell company to hide her involvement. Even worse, the contract contained clauses that heavily favored the buyer, including a provision allowing them to back out with minimal penalties while locking Dad into the sale. "This isn't just a bad deal," Jake explained over the phone. "This is structured fraud. Sandra and her partners were never taking any real risk. If the property turned out to have problems or if the market shifted, they could walk away and leave your father holding the bag. But if everything went according to plan, they'd make a fortune renovating and flipping the property. Can we use this?" "Absolutely. I'm filing a motion to void the sale based on fraudulent misrepresentation and undisclosed conflicts of interest. Given the evidence we've gathered, I think we have an excellent chance of success. But even as the legal case strengthened, the personal cost was becoming clear. Dad and Sandra's marriage was imploding under the pressure. She was furious about the media attention, blaming me for ruining their plans. He was starting to realize how thoroughly he'd been manipulated. They were staying in separate bedrooms, communicating only through terse text messages, and according to my Aunt Linda, seriously considering divorce. Part of me felt vindicated. They'd destroyed my life. Now theirs was falling apart too. But another part of me, the part that remembered Dad teaching me to ride a bike in the cottage's driveway, helping me with algebra homework at the kitchen table, driving 5 hours to pick me up when Tom and I separated, felt sick about what this was doing to him. The breaking point came 3 weeks after the newspaper article ran. I was at the cottage, photographing the interior for the landmark application, when I heard a car pull up outside. Through the window, I saw Dad getting out of his truck, moving like a man carrying the weight of the world. He found me in Grandma May's bedroom, carefully documenting the original built-in wardrobe she'd commissioned from a local craftsman in 1955. "Maya." His voice was hoarse, defeated. "We need to talk." I set down my camera and turned to face him. Up close, he looked terrible, unshaven, hollow-eyed like he hadn't slept in days. "Sandra's leaving me," he said without preamble. "She filed for divorce this morning." I didn't trust myself to speak. "She says I'm too weak to stand up to you. That I'm letting you manipulate me with guilt and sentimentality." He sank down on Grandma May's old rocking chair, the one where she'd taught me to knit. "Maybe she's right." "Dad." "No. Let me finish." He held up a hand, and for a moment I glimpsed the man who'd raised me, the one who'd insisted on honesty even when the truth was hard. "I need you to know that I genuinely thought I was helping you. The divorce left you in a bad place, and you seemed so lost, so stuck. I thought maybe if you were forced to move on, to build something new, you'd find your way again. By taking away the one thing that made me feel grounded, by taking away your crutch." His voice cracked. "But I was wrong, wasn't I? This place isn't holding you back. It's what gives you strength." I felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "Dad, Grandma May didn't leave me this cottage to hide in. She left it to me because she knew I'd fight for it. Because she knew I'd understand what it really represents." "What does it represent?" I gestured around the room, taking in the faded floral wallpaper my grandmother had hung herself, the window seat where 4 generations of women had sat to think and dream and plan. Continuity, legacy. The idea that some things are worth preserving, not because they're perfect, but because they're ours. I sat down on the edge of the bed, facing him. This cottage has weathered the Depression. 2 wars. Countless storms. The women who lived here were tough, Dad. They didn't give up when things got hard. Like you're not giving up now. Like I'm not giving up now. We sat in silence for several minutes, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows and painting everything in gold. Finally, Dad spoke again. Sandra was involved in the sale from the beginning, wasn't she? Yes. And you can prove it? Jake thinks so. Another long pause. What do you need from me to make this right? The question caught me off guard. After weeks of fighting, of treating him like the enemy, he was offering to surrender. I need you to testify about Sandra's involvement. I need you to support the motion to void the sale, and I took a shaky breath. I need you to want this place to stay in the family. Dad stood and walked to the window, looking out at the lake where he'd learned to sail as a boy. I do want that, Maya. I always have. I forgot what really mattered. It's not too late, isn't it? Even if we void the sale, the legal fees alone will bankrupt us both, and Sandra will fight the divorce settlement, which means she'll try to claim half of whatever assets I have left. Let me worry about that. He turned back to me, confused. What do you mean? I pulled out my laptop and showed him the crowdfunding page I'd set up 3 days earlier. The cottage's story touched a lot of people, Dad. People who understand what it means to lose a piece of family history to development. They've donated almost $40,000 to help with legal fees. His eyes widened as he scrolled through the hundreds of comments from strangers offering support, sharing their own stories, expressing anger at what had happened to our family. There's more, I continued. The Historical Preservation Society has offered to cover any remaining legal costs in exchange for a conservation easement that would protect the cottage in perpetuity. And the county is fast-tracking the landmark designation, which means even if Sunrise Holdings somehow keeps the property, they can't tear it down. You've thought of everything. I've had time to think. And help from people who understand what we're fighting for. Dad closed the laptop and looked around the room again, as if seeing it clearly for the first time in months. Your grandmother would be proud of you. She'd be proud of both of us if we can save this place. Then let's save it. The legal resolution came faster than anyone expected. When faced with Jake's evidence of fraud and Sandra's involvement, plus the public relations nightmare the story had become, Sunrise Holdings agreed to void the sale in exchange for being released from any further liability. They quietly dissolved the partnership and disappeared, leaving Sandra to face potential criminal charges for real estate fraud. Dad's divorce was messier and more expensive, but he came through it with enough assets to live comfortably, especially after deciding to downsize to a small apartment in town instead of the Arizona retirement community Sandra had wanted. 6 months later, the cottage was officially designated as a county historical landmark. The crowdfunding campaign had raised enough money not just for legal fees, but for some of the structural repairs the house genuinely needed. I used my graphic design skills to create a website documenting the cottage's history, and the resulting publicity brought in enough tourism to make the bed and breakfast plan viable. I moved back in permanently, not as someone hiding from life, but as someone who'd found her purpose. The cottage became what Grandma May had always envisioned, a living piece of history, a gathering place for family, and a testament to the strength of women who refused to give up. Dad visits every Sunday now, helping with maintenance projects and slowly rebuilding the relationship we'd nearly lost. We don't talk much about Sandra or the sale. Some wounds take time to heal completely, but we're learning to trust each other again, and the cottage is helping with that too. The other day, I found him sitting in Grandma May's rocking chair, reading a book about local history. You know, he said without looking up, I'd forgotten how peaceful it is here. That's why she fought so hard to keep it, I replied, and why I fought so hard to get it back. No, he said, finally meeting my eyes. You fought so hard because you're exactly like her, stubborn, fierce, and absolutely unstoppable when you believe in something. I accepted the compliment with a smile, but privately I knew he was wrong about one thing. I hadn't fought for the cottage because I was like Grandma May. I'd discovered I was like her because I was willing to fight for the cottage. The house hadn't just been my inheritance, it had been my teacher, showing me what I was truly capable of when everything I valued was on the line. Sometimes, late at night, I walk through the rooms and feel the presence of all the women who came before me. Great-grandmother Rose, who had the courage to buy property as a widow in the 1920s. Grandma May, who restored every inch of this place with her own hands. My mother, who filled it with laughter and love before cancer took her too soon. They're all here in the creaking floors and the rose-scented air, in the recipes handwritten on index cards, and the photo albums documenting decades of birthdays and holidays, and quiet Sunday afternoons. And now I'm part of that legacy too, no longer as someone seeking shelter, but as someone strong enough to provide it for the next generation. The cottage taught me that some things are worth fighting for, not because the battle is easy, but because victory means preserving something irreplaceable. My father sold my $1 million cottage and handed me a $15,000 check, thinking he was teaching me about responsibility. Instead, he taught me about my own power, about the strength that comes from deep roots and unshakable convictions. It was the most expensive lesson he ever gave me, and the most valuable thing I ever learned.